for February 3. Just before they went to bed, our instructor, a contracted thief within, said, "Stay here and write a page tonight, and let that page draw out of you, then it will be true through and through. But also let that page recall democracy as Black history on February 3rd, 1870. But is Black history as democracy really so easy to see? I wonder if it's that simple. Because whereas the 15th Amendment states, Section 1, there are, in 2021, 19 states enacted 33 voting restriction laws which all effectively limit African Americans' ability to participate equitably in the democratic process. GHT of citizens of the United States, Arizona legislatures passed 3 restrictive voting bills this year, and they have pre-filed at least one bill that would restrict voting access by imposing stricter identification requirements. Additionally, state legislators introduced 3 bills in 2021 that would have directly empowered partisan officials to reject or overturn election results. The state also conducted an infamous partisan election review this year when it contracted a third party to audit Maricopa County's 2020 election results. Despite no evidence of fraud, the review has drummed up false rhetoric around voter fraud and galvanized public officials to push for restrictive voting legislation. "'Tis to vote shall not be denied wherever." Georgia passed SB 202, a restrictive omnibus law that criminalizes passing out water to voters waiting in line. The law also politicizes the state's Board of Elections and grants the board new powers to remove professional election officials and seize control of election administration in specific jurisdictions, which could lead to partisan influence in the election certification process. Moreover, partisan actors sought to review the election results in Fulton County because of false allegations of fraud, despite the fact that state election officials conducted a statutory audit that led to a full hand count along with 2 machine counts. Georgia has high-profile elections for Secretary of State and Governor in 2022. One candidate for Secretary of State has repeated false fraud claims and voted not to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, while 2 candidates for governor have explicitly stated that they would not have certified the results of the 2020 election had they been in office at the time. Ed by the state of Michigan's legislature passed, but the governor vetoed 3 restrictive voting bills. 15 restricted bills are carrying over into the 2022 legislative session, and the state has a gubernatorial race next year. Additionally, partisan actors have turned to a ballot initiative to pass restrictive measures to bypass both the governor and the people. Due to a quirk of the Michigan Constitution, if a ballot initiative garners the required number of signatures of support, 340,047, the legislature gets the chance to pass it in its own right. This means the majority of Michigan voters never get an opportunity to vote on the initiative, and the governor has no power to veto such an initiative if a legislature passes it. Anti-voting activists are currently organizing a restrictive ballot initiative that would, among other things, eliminate the ability for voters who lack a voter identification to cast a regular ballot, require voters to put the last 4 digits of their social security number on their voter registration, require voters to provide their driver's license number, state ID card number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number on absentee ballot applications, and prohibit either the Secretary of State or local election officials from affirmatively sending absentee ballot application forms to voters. The number of signatures required to give the green light for the Michigan legislature to roll back the voting rights of millions of Michiganders, unchecked by the governor or voters, is fewer than the actual number of votes separating the 2 major candidates in the state's last gubernatorial election. In one Michigan county, a partisan group was given access to voting machines to review the 2020 election results, despite the fact that Michigan has a robust, accurate risk-limiting audit system already in place, and lawmakers introduced a bill that would have allowed a member of a county board of canvassers to rescind their vote to certify the results of an election, which is exactly what President Trump saw in Wayne County after the 2020 election. the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or Pennsylvania's legislature passed one wide-ranging restrictive bill in 2021, which the governor vetoed. 30 restrictive bills are carrying over into the 2022 legislative session. The state also has a gubernatorial race next year. 4 of the restrictive carryover bills are constitutional amendment proposals that would enable state legislators to get restrictive voting laws on the books without the governor's review. BHM2022 eliminates no excuse mail voting, removes the ability to prescribe other methods of voting by statute. PHJ.R.1596 requires voter ID for in-person voting. Proof of voter ID and signature for absentee voting. Requires signature matching for mail ballots. PASJR 735 requires voter ID for in-person voting. Proof of voter ID for absentee voting. PASJR 884 eliminates no excuse mail voting. Removes ability to prescribe other methods of voting by statute. Moves absentee ballot return deadline from 8 p.m. on election day to 5 p.m. the Friday before election day. Requires all absentee ballots to be subject to signature verification. Eliminates permanent mail voting list. These proposals would need majority approval by the 2021, 2022, and 2022-2023 state legislatures, and then majority approval from voters. Further, officials in one rural Pennsylvania county agreed to a questionable partisan review of their 2020 election results by a private security firm with no previous experience auditing elections and funded by Sidney Powell, a Trump-affiliated attorney who pursued unsuccessful post-election lawsuits based on debunked conspiracy theories. A Pennsylvania state senator who was present at Capitol Hill during the January 6th insurrection has since used the results of this questionable review to push for further restrictive voting legislation. Rebellious condition of survey, Texas passed SB 1 in 2021, one of the harshest restrictive voting bills in the country. The law makes it harder for voters with disabilities and language access barriers to obtain assistance. Constrains election workers' ability to stop harassment by poll watchers, and bans 24-hour and drive-through voting, among other measures. Texas legislators also introduced legislation this year that would have provided for the overturning of election results and that explicitly called for third-party forensic reviews of the election results. Even without authorizing legislation, the Secretary of State's office launched an unnecessary audit into the 2020 election in 4 Texas counties. Even though routine audits had already occurred, documents published by the Secretary of State's office would allow for a manual count of votes in those counties, as well as an examination of other election records and voter lists. Section 2. New Hampshire, Missouri, and South Carolina have each pre-filed at least one voting bill that would restrict access to the vote, as well as bills that would initiate or allow for partisan reviews of election results in 2022. Missouri also introduced legislation this past session that would have empowered partisan officials to overturn election results. Grass shall have hoe. Wisconsin's legislature passed 2 restrictive voting bills this year, which the governor vetoed. 13 restrictive bills are carrying over into the 2022 legislative session, and the state has a gubernatorial race next year. Wisconsin has also initiated an investigation into the 2020 election results. The effort lacks transparency, fairness, and credibility, and is being staffed by a well-known partisan operative with a prior history of spreading false claims of election fraud. In order to enforce this article by appropriate, Tennessee and Florida have each pre-filed bills that would initiate partisan reviews of the 2020 election results in 2022. E-legislation. It appears that American history has always found a way to subvert and suppress true democracy.